1. So me and my mom usually go out for a walk after dinner during summertime, since it's pretty warm outside at night. We take the main road most people also do for walking, which goes all around town and covers pretty much every place, from residential areas to schools and commercial areas. That night, both me and my mom decided to take our headphones and listen to some music on the way. The volume on my mom's headphones was turned up way higher than on mine though. This might seem irrelevant, but it's an important piece of info a bit further on, so that I actually had to try and talk and repeat myself multiple times to get her attention along the way, whenever I wanted to chat about something, because she just couldn't hear what I said. We eventually finished our walk, and since we did it a bit earlier than usual, we decided to go down the street where we live, which leads into another residential area, and come back up since we still had some more time to spare, and it was a pretty hot night. Actually, it was so warm that while on our way, I noticed most people in that residential area still had their windows and balcony access doors open, and you could hear everyone chatting and others still tidying the kitchen and doing the dishes from dinner time through the open windows. When we got to the end of the street and turned back again to go home, I heard a loud noise coming from the other side of the road, and I looked to see 3 guys standing next to a white van. I turned my music volume lower, but they seemed to be just happily chatting, so I assumed they were most likely harmless people. Don't get me wrong, but they were standing in quite an isolated and dark place, and since it was getting kinda late, I was just being cautious. On the other hand, my mom didn't even hear or pay attention to them, and just kept on walking. I was just about to turn my music volume back up when it happened. Coming from somewhere very near us, I could hear what happened to be a man's voice, shouting very loud, very angrily, and very clearly, "You son of a bitch, I'll kill you!" followed by what seemed to be a woman's loud gasp. I immediately stopped dead in my tracks and unplugged my headphones so I could figure out what was going on. Where did that come from? Was it directed at us? My mom, always walking a bit ahead of me, noticed I had stopped and motioned me to catch up, but I took out my own headphones and asked her if she didn't hear that scream, to which she responded no. Probably because of how loud her music was, but for the record, the man's scream was loud as hell. I felt like it came from somewhere near the buildings with the open windows we were walking right by, but my first instinct was to look back at the guys in the white van. Gone, without a trace. I didn't even notice them driving down the road, if they ever did. It was also then that I noticed that the loud chatting and other noises coming from the people in the buildings I had heard previously through the open windows had all also gone away. Everything was dead silent now. It was terrifying. I never heard the man or the woman again, not a single sound. My mom and I stood there for a couple more minutes, looking for the possible source of the sound, but there was just silence. The whole street was suddenly quiet. We just sprinted back home without looking back, and we haven't gone on that street again ever since. We also didn't hear of any incident that could have taken place in the area after that, but I swear it was very real and very scary. I feel like I must state that I'm almost 100% sure it wasn't a loud TV, because it just didn't sound like it. Nor was there some sort of sports match on or anything like that at that time, since it was getting late, that could have caused that reaction from anyone. It also didn't sound like it was someone shouting that in a joking manner. It sounded way too threatening. Also, the woman's gasp. It's all still so creepy to me. I had no idea where it came from, who was it, and what caused it. I just know I heard it. Since my mom only knew of what went down because I told her what I heard, she says it was probably my mind playing tricks on me. But I assure you it was not. I heard that. So I guess whoever it was, please, let's not meet. Ever. 2. So this is a story that not only affected me, but it affected my whole high school theater arts department. Back about 6 years ago, I was a junior in high school. I was very active in my drama club, and me and a bunch of my friends would be a part of the shows that were performed at my school. Insert creepy old trombone player. Let's call him Steve. Steve was an old man who played trombone in our school's pit. He had been playing in it for the last few years before I was even in high school. Apparently he was very good as he toured across the country and played in many national tours and such. But the reason they kept Steve around is because of how much money he put into our theatre program. He would constantly be donating money into our funds in order to make our production value incredible. Our production of Little Shop of Horrors was amazing, because we were able to pay for a plant that looked so realistic instead of a crappy one. He was a bit of a dick, but I guess when you have money that doesn't matter. Here's where it gets sort of creepy. Steve would award 2 students a scholarship of $100 if they were his favorite actor in the show that year, and would take them out for lunch. It's not terrible, the money is nice, taking them out is a bit creepy though. Thankfully our director would accompany whoever got this scholarship, so it wasn't bad. As the years went on, Steve would appear more in my high school and become closer with some of my friends. 2 of them he grew in high attraction to, and almost sort of took them under his wing. He would give one of my friends many expensive instruments that were his, and the other he would pay for him to go to a singing camp and class. Again, not totally bad. Now it gets a bit creepier. One day Steve tells both of my friends that they won a trip with him to see the Broadway musical Cinderella, with him and 2 of his other friends. Now, here's this guy who's 76, with 2 of his other older friends asking 2 boys who are 16 to go out on a trip. The thought is nice, but it's pretty ridiculous. Luckily, there was an extra ticket that one of my friend's mothers went on the trip. Steve and his friends apparently weren't very happy with that. Also should mention that he rented a full stretch limo for all of them. This is where shit gets super creepy. Steve starts coming to my high school more regularly now. Usually he would only come during rehearsals for the musicals, for the sole reason of playing in the pit. Kids started to kiss his ass, even the theatre faculty, because he had all this money that he was giving. But still, here's this old man coming into our high school during hours, and sometimes after, just sitting in our theatre watching us rehearse or act. It was almost like he was salivating at seeing us young kids. Then one day he starts asking favors from us, and asks a kid to give him a full back rub for money. He does it, obviously for the money, and Steve is basically orgasmic to this. People begin to get very creeped out by this, and a lot of eyebrows are being raised at this guy. The final nail in the coffin was when Steve tried to give me a brand new guitar. He has also just given me the scholarship, and I knew I was eventually going to have to go out with him. However, my dad intercepted the bass, and started to question who this was coming from. He, an undercover detective, felt that this was very fishy, as he had heard some stories of this man but didn't know the full extent. He reported it to the school to investigate this man. Guess what? It turns out this guy was a straight-up pedophile. When doing further research on this guy online, this guy was a registered sex offender, and was found guilty of sexual abuse all the way back in 1974. And in 2005, he was arrested for doing the same thing to another young boy. But that's my story. Shortly after, he ceased contact from me and my friends. He actually wrote one of them a really nasty letter for outing him, and told him to rot in hell. We assume now he's dead. But Steve, let's never meet again. Side note, one time I almost accidentally killed Steve. He would walk with a cane and was very slow to move. One day he was pushing a door open, and I saw him struggling and felt bad, so I went to hold the door open for him. As soon as I grabbed it, he nearly almost fell down since he was holding the door for support. He quickly gained his balance, looked at me very angry, and said, "You could have killed me!" 3. This story goes way back, and thankfully never escalated into anything more than what it was. A period of time that instilled the fear of God in me, but also taught me a valuable lesson about internet safety in the cautionary tale generated from my young naivete. False security and teenage invincibility. We've all been there at one point or another. When we're young, we don't think about the potential dangers entailing from using the internet with reckless abandon. I knew there were predators out there, but I never applied much thought in regard to it, besides the standard precautions. I never gave out my last name or my location to anyone. I knew that much at least. I used to frequent an online message board. It was a tight-knit community. Everyone knew each other on a personal level and were good friends. I had plenty of good friends in my immediate life, but I had made many friendships through this site. They are great people, and to this day I am still in contact with some of them. I even met one of them while on vacation last summer, which was nothing short of a wonderful experience. But there was one user who was different. Being a very friendship-oriented community, everyone was very welcoming of him the moment he joined. But anyone could see that there was always something about him that was off. He was just odd. But at the same time, he came off as a sweet and naive character. Wouldn't hurt a fly, we thought. I felt sorry for him. His lack of social grace and people skills had me inclined to believe he didn't have many friends in his life. I foolishly made the mistake of befriending him, or at least showing him friendliness. It was a short-sighted decision, and one that would result in a long and traumatizing ordeal for me. He became obsessed with me. There's no other way to describe it. I shrugged it off as some weird online crush that would pass, but it never did. If anything, his obsession with me grew stronger every day. It started off small and innocent enough. He'd always praise me and agree with anything I said, even if my view was dramatically different from his. He would continually single me out and shower me with praise, but always in a seemingly respectful manner. We all thought he was awkward and harmless. Then his antics became more fervent. He would hound me multiple times a day to Skype with him. I repeatedly declined until one day I agreed, if only to verify that he was indeed who he said he was. At this point, almost everyone's identity was verified via group Skype calls. He wasn't necessarily rude or offensive in the beginning, just very awkward and eccentric. I kept the session brief because he made me uncomfortable, but I didn't think much of it at the time either. He seemed harmless, albeit strange. I felt sorry for him, honestly, and didn't want him to be outcasted. Nobody ever suspected there to be any element of malevolence in his behavior. But then the qualities I initially dismissed as quirks gradually became something more sinister. He began revealing things about himself to me that he surely knew made me uncomfortable. About how his father would beat his mother. About how he used to torture animals as a child. All of it was purposeful, even if he played it off as being clueless and too socially inept to fully understand the inappropriateness of his behavior at the time. I stopped talking with him after that, but still didn't completely shut him out. My view of him was that he was socially awkward, but still had no nefarious intent. Nobody suspected anything. He seemed so naive and innocent. Around the time I started getting creepy, mostly perverted anonymous messages, and trolls started flooding the board, personally singling me out. Creepy as it was, I took it with a grain of salt. This wasn't the first time the board was overrun with trolls. We'd had a troll problem for a long time now, and this didn't seem any different. I did not make the connection between any of it and him. One day he asked to join a Skype call between my friend and I. We hesitantly obliged, not wanting to hurt his feelings. To our disgust, he started pleasuring himself in the call. I cut all ties with him after that, and he apologized profusely before disappearing. I thought that was the end of it, but it was just the beginning. After his vanishing act, the creepy messages became more violent and threatening. I was receiving at least 100 a day from multiple anonymous guises. It didn't take a genius to figure out who was doing this. Before I knew it, I was being impersonated on multiple accounts throughout social media sites. My inbox became flooded with hundreds of messages threatening to kill, rape, mutilate me in the most barbaric of ways every week. Anonymous accounts would send me collages of pictures of me from sources I never shared with anyone, and of which I had no idea how the person gained access to them, as I had never given out my personal social media. In some of these pictures my eyes would be cut out, or the image would be perversely doctored. The board became flooded with multiple anonymous accounts, all posting threatening messages about me. The person even made a website dedicated to his plan to rape and kill me and linked me to it. But it was taken down not long after. I started saving everything this nutcase sent to me, so I could compile evidence and request it for performance of an extensive IP check. One of the stock accounts that was checked matched up with 200 other accounts, including, you guessed it, his original account. I always knew it was him, but to have it confirmed that this psychopath created 200 accounts to use to stalk and terrorize me was finally enough to truly unsettle me. Up until a whole year of his online stalking antics, I wasn't too bothered. Yes, I was creeped out, but I wasn't fearing for my life. Until the calls started coming. Somehow, and to this day I have no idea how the fuck he got my home phone number. I never told him my last name or anything that could have led him to my personal information. My guess is that he must have acquired it from my last name, and he would have had to have gotten that from my Facebook, as I never told anyone what my surname was. How he found my Facebook, though, I honestly don't know. The moment he got my number, he would call my house at all hours of the day and night. I never answered it. My dad did all of the time, though. It didn't matter how many times my dad would hang up. Within 5 seconds, the creep would be calling back, and this would go on in a cycle at every hour of the day. It got to the point where none of us were sleeping because he was calling non-stop every hour, until the wee hours of the morning. At this point, I was beside myself with fear. I expected that any day he would show up at my door. If he had my home phone number, he certainly had my address. I became so paranoid that I put tape over all my webcams in case he somehow managed to hack them. No matter what, I couldn't shake the feeling that he could somehow see me. That he was always watching me, even though I knew he was safely across the continent from me. I spent many sleepless nights fearing that he'd show up any second and try to kill me. We contacted our phone service provider, asking them to trace the call. The number itself was untraceable, but they were eventually able to pinpoint the address of the caller. Sure enough, it was coming from the state of which I knew he lived, because he had once told me. I knew without a shadow of a doubt it was him doing this. But what could I really do about it? The cops wouldn't care about some threatening phone calls and messages from a creep miles and miles away. It went on for 2 years. I clued my family in as to what was happening immediately once the call started. But there was not much else we could do besides block the multiple numbers he'd call from, and eventually just unplug the phone altogether to get a decent night of sleep. Needless to say, I eventually reached the end of my rope. My cyberstalker, as psychopathic as he is, was not the brightest crayon in the box. Before he began his reign of terror on me, he had revealed all sorts of information about himself, even posted them online. I knew what state he lived in, his parents' names, his full name, etc. Call it the typical hubris characteristic of a not-so-smart psychopath. He made it all too easy for me to turn the tables on him. I went from avoiding and ignoring him to actively stalking him back. Doing some digging and creeping of my own, I was able to acquire personal information of his. It honestly wasn't very hard finding his parents' phone number. I had a last name, and he had once told me their first names. Bingo. He was a 20-something-year-old that I knew still lived with them. I thought at the very least it was about time his family found out what he had been up to. A call was made to them revealing everything. And I do mean everything. I don't know for sure if they ever got the message. It was left as a voicemail since nobody answered. But I assume that phone call had its intended effect, because it's been years and I haven't heard a peep from him since. I hope he got the help he needed, but I frankly don't care what became of him so long as he's not tormenting anyone else. In hindsight, it's pretty funny that ratting him out to his parents was enough to stop him, but not all too surprising. For a 20-something-year-old, he was incredibly childish. Psychopathic, cyber-stalker, let's not meet. Ever. For your sake. Because I am not afraid of you anymore. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here. And thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 317. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I'm just going to keep this outro here brief. The hunger is upon me, and I think I'll spend the rest of my night, well, very early morning to be perfectly honest with you, just snacking and watching horror movies. So my Sunday was a bit of a wash, to be honest with you. I didn't get a lot done, well, in terms of relaxing, so I'll be spending the rest of the day doing that. And with that, I'm heading off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.